Good Friday afternoon to everyone. Welcome to Walking Through History, this Friday edition of our study, walking through the story of God and his people in the Bible. We have made our way to Joshua chapter 9 after a good study of Joshua chapter 8 this past Tuesday, as we talked about the success of the children of Israel against the people of Ai. In that text, we began this little series of events with a resounding victory at Jericho, which was followed up by an embarrassing defeat at the hands of Ai because of sin that was found within the camp of Israel. After that sin was addressed and rectified, they were then able to go up against Ai with the Lord's instruction and have victory against those people. They're just making their way through the land. The children of Israel are. They've crossed over the Jordan River, making their way westward. They've had those successes against Jericho, against Ai and Bethel. And because of that great success, there's news of this people, this large nation of people who are making their way through Canaan land, conquering strong enemies, conquering anyone who is in their way. And we're going to see today in our study of Joshua chapter 9, a little group of people who are trying to figure out how they can survive and the means by which they go about doing so. Thank you for joining us today as we get into this text of Joshua chapter 9. Good, as always, I have my good friend Alan Seenestrang here with us again. This has been a busy week for him, getting some stuff moved around and to a new location for his family. I'm glad that he has a few minutes to fit us in for this study between the moving and the other online classes that he is teaching. We're glad to have Alan with us today. Hope you're doing well and excited to get into this text of Joshua chapter 9. Let's go ahead and get reading. Joshua chapter 9 and verse number 1. And this is following the victories against Jericho, Ai, and Bethel. Joshua chapter 9 and verse 1, when all the kings heard about Jericho and Ai, those who are west of the Jordan in the hill country, in the Judean foothills, and all along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea towards Lebanon, the Hethites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, they formed a unified alliance to fight against Joshua and Israel. But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they acted deceptively. They gathered provisions and took out worn out sacks on their donkeys and old wineskins cracked and mended. They wore old patched sandals on their feet and threadbare clothing on their bodies. Their entire provision of bread was dry and crumbly. They went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and the men of Israel, "We have come from a distant land." That's key here. "We've come from a distant land. Please make a treaty with us." The men of Israel replied to the Hivites, "Perhaps you live among us. How can we make a treaty with you?" And they said to Joshua, "We are your servants." Then Joshua asked them, "Who are you, and where do you come from?" They replied to him, "Your servants have come from a faraway land because of the reputation of the Lord your God. For we have heard of his fame and all that he did in Egypt and all that he did to the two Amorite kings beyond the Jordan, King Sihon of Heshbon and King Og of Bashan, who was in Ashtaroth. So our elders and all the inhabitants of our land told us, 'Take provisions with you for the journey. Go and meet them and say, we are your servants. Please make a treaty with us. This bread of ours was warm when we took it from our houses as food on the day we left to come to you. But see, it is now dry and crumbly. These wineskins were new when we filled them, but see, they are cracked. And our clothes and sandals of ours are worn out from the extremely long journey." Then the men of Israel took some of their provisions, but did not seek the Lord's decision. So Joshua established peace with them and made a treaty to let them live. And the leaders of the community swore an oath to them. 3 days after making a treaty with them, they heard that the Gibeonites were their neighbors living among them. So the Israelites set out and reached the Gibeonite cities on the third day. Now their cities were Gibeon, Chephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim. But the Israelites did not attack them because the leaders of the community had sworn an oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Then the whole community grumbled against the leaders. All the leaders answered them, "We have sworn an oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we cannot touch them. This is how we will treat them. We will let them live so that no wrath will fall on us because of the oath we swore to them. And they also said, let them live. So the Gibeonites became woodcutters and water carriers for the whole community as the leaders had promised them. Joshua summoned the Gibeonites and said to them, why did you deceive us by telling us you live far away from us, when in fact you live among us? Therefore you are cursed and will always be slaves, woodcutters and water carriers for the house of my God. The Gibeonites answered him, it was clearly communicated to your servants that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you. We greatly feared for our lives because of you, and that is why we did this. Now we are in your hands. Do to us whatever you think is right. This is what Joshua did to them. He rescued them from the Israelites, and they did not kill them. On that day, he made them woodcutters and water carriers, as they are today, for the community and for the Lord's altar at the place he would choose. Alan, it's very clear that the reputation of Israel and their God preceded them. And in fact, the people of the land in those first couple of verses, all the way west of the Jordan, in the hill country and the Judean foothills, all along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, all of these nations, Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, everyone was scared. Everyone knew this was an issue, and they thought to themselves, the only way we even stand a chance is if we unite. So they have this alliance, this coalition that forms to be able to stand up against Israel, at least in their minds, to give themselves the best chance to do so. But we have this little group of Hivites, the Gibeonites, I should say, from the city of Gibeon, and then those other cities that are mentioned in verse number 17 as well. They have a different plan. They're not going to try to do this with brute force. They're going to use this with conniving deception. Alan, what do you think about their tactic here and Joshua's response to them? And I guess the best place to start here is why this distinction between being people who are living among them and being people that are far away. I think that's the key in what takes place here within this particular section. What insight do you have from previous texts that give us an understanding of why this distinction is made and why that would change the way that Joshua and the people react to them?
Well, we've seen this list before. The Amorites, the Canaanites, we've been talking about this since Genesis, how eventually they would come and they would displace them. And it's talked several times that they were to be wiped out. I mean, these peoples were wicked, idolatrous people. They were supposed to be completely and utterly destroyed. Mm-hmm. That's been said multiple times. Well, that was the law given to the Israelites, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they will be. And obviously they left many of these peoples in the land, and the reason they were supposed to do that was to avoid the influence that they would have. Their wickedness was such that it would spread to the Israelites if they did not remove them from the land. Well, you see within this chapter two different responses. You mentioned how the peoples of the land were afraid. Well, not all the peoples feared in the same way. So look at the two responses. You have this group of these other cities along the coast toward Lebanon, all these other peoples. Their fear of Israel, their response is to fight them, to go against God's will, which the Gibeonites had said. I mean, they clearly understood what was going to happen. So you have the Gibeonites that I think come across as pretty good in this chapter because, look what it says down here. Your servant, we heard of the fame, verse 9, all that he did in Egypt, all that he did to the two Amorite kings, pretty much the same language that Rahab said back in Jericho. Mm-hmm. They're showing the fear of God and not the obstinance against him that these other peoples are. So it's because of this. Yes, it mentions that they were deceptive, and yeah, they were, but you can't really hold it against them because they're trying to live. They're trying to survive. They feared God enough to know that what was coming, and they were doing whatever they could to survive. Mm-hmm. And they knew, and they were not bold and obstinate enough to think that they could defeat the Lord God and his armies and the army of Israel. So they were trying anything, any other means they could. And I think it's because of that fear. That's not that their deception or anything was going to fool God. Obviously, it fooled the Israelites because they did not consult God. But because of their fear, that's what kept them alive. And they actually end up getting a pretty important role. It mentions that they would become woodcutters and water carriers. At the very last verse 27, for the Lord's altar at the place he would choose. Well, Gibeon, let me pull up the map here if I can find it. So Gibeon is pretty close to where Jerusalem is going to be. So you can see Gibeon right here, kind of in the middle. We're talking about maybe 5 miles from Jerusalem. And actually, they're about 5 miles to Bethel too, which Bethel was the kind of resting place for the tabernacle for many, many generations until the temple was built. So the Gibeonites not only survive the conquest of the land, but they end up getting a pretty prominent role, which, they're still slaves, but I think of it this way. Think about the prodigal son. He wanted to come back, and he would have been happy to just be a servant in his father's house. Well, that's the same mindset that the Gibeonites have. They're happy to be a servant in the house of the Lord, and it's better than being wiped out, I guess. So I think they show great faith. And then on the contrast, you have Joshua and the leaders here that kind of fail again, and they do not consult the Lord, which you think they would have learned that lesson with Ai, and then they seem to learn it last chapter, and now they've forgotten about it again. They trust in their own judgment and make this kind of rash vow and treaty with them, and then they have to honor it.
Yeah, and then this goes back to the book of Deuteronomy and some rules for war that Moses lays down for the people as they go into the land and conquest against it. In Deuteronomy 20 and verse 10, when you approach a city to fight against it, make an offer of peace. If it accepts your offer of peace and opens its gates to you, all the people found in it will become forced laborers for you and serve you, which is exactly what we're seeing here within this text. However, this is Deuteronomy 20, verse 12. However, if it does not make peace with you, but wages war against you, lay siege to it. When the Lord your God hands it over to you, strike down all its males with the sword, but you may take the women, dependents, animals, and whatever else is in the city, all its spoils as plunder. You may enjoy the spoil of your enemies that the Lord your God has given you. This is how you are to treat all the cities that are far away from you and not among the cities of these nations. However, you must not let any living thing survive among the cities of these people the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. You must completely destroy them, the Hethite, Amorite, Canaanite, Perizzite, Hivite, and Jebusite, as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you won't teach, so that they won't teach you to do all the detestable acts they do for their gods, and you sin against the Lord your God. So we see that, I think, here the difference between these two different classes of people, those who are among them and those who were from far away. If they're from far away and you go up against them, and they have an opportunity, they have a choice here, whether they can have peace with you, or if they want to rebel against you and fight, then you can destroy them. Well, here, somehow, some way, I couldn't tell you how exactly. Something that's interesting to me, Alan, is verse 24. That after the ruse has been found out and Joshua confronts them, the Gibeonites answer him, it was clearly communicated to your servants that the Lord your God has commanded his servant Moses to give all the land and to destroy all that happens in the land before you. How does he know that? Like, what? How does he know that? How do they know this specific thing? And apparently, going back to what we just read in Deuteronomy 20, I couldn't answer you how they know, and maybe you have some insight to it, but they know it. They know that if we present ourselves as being from far away and we want to make peace, then they will make peace with us and they'll make us their servants, which is exactly what we see here in this text. This all goes back to the fact that they actually were a part of the Hivites that are mentioned not just here in Joshua 9, but also mentioned specifically in Deuteronomy 20. They were part of the people who were supposed to be destroyed. They're thinking, hey, if we present ourselves as being from far away, we have a chance here to survive, which is exactly what they do. They are able to make peace with Israel and survive. Yet that peace wasn't necessarily a guaranteed thing from the standpoint of the people, because we want to notice, as you highlighted, Alan, just as they did not seemingly consult God back in Ai, the original Ai in chapter 7 and verses 3-5, they don't seek the Lord's decision here in this text either. They make this treaty, and yet after it's found out, the people, the whole community at the end of verse number 18, the whole community grumbles against the leaders because they know what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to destroy anyone who is living among them, who's living within this area of Canaan, who are part of these peoples. They want to go and they want to do that because we see, let's see here, verse 26, after Joshua goes to Gibeon and speaks with them and comes to understanding what's going on, 26 says that Joshua did to them, he rescued them from the Israelites. Why? Well, why does Joshua rescue a people, Alan, that God had explicitly said to destroy back in Deuteronomy and even here within the text we've seen in Joshua? Why did he rescue them?
Well, they obviously were trying to kill them. They thought that they were doing what's right. They knew that they were supposed to wipe these peoples out, but they didn't really. They definitely didn't agree with the treaty that was made by the leadership, but because of that, Joshua had to rescue them. Looking forward, there's actually a story in 2 Samuel chapter 21. It mentions this is during the time of David, and he's the king.
Right.
And there's a famine in the land, and David inquires of the Lord, what's that about? And apparently we don't know the story. It's just kind of referenced in retrospect, but apparently years before, Saul had taken it upon himself to destroy, to kill the Gibeonites. I mean, this is obviously years later. So you still see that happening even generations on down, yet because of that oath that was taken by the leadership, right, there was blood guilt against Saul. He was doing this rashly obviously without consulting God. He thought he was doing what's right, much like the people were, but he was at fault. And then in extension, now David and the people are guilty of that. So they have to, there's kind of a vengeance against the people that needs to be, a blood guilt against them that needs to be rectified. So David ends up giving them several of Saul's family, his sons, as basically like a sacrifice to them. So kind of just a weird connection here, but it shows, I think it shows where God fell on the spectrum here. I mean, they made an oath to protect the Gibeonites and not destroy them, and Saul breaks that later on, and that's why the people are punished. And right here, Joshua prevents that from happening, at least in this instance, by the people just going against him and the elders.
Right. If there was an oath that was made, especially one that was made based upon the Lord, they felt an extreme obligation to uphold that oath and to not break that oath, which is why they went, why Joshua seemingly goes so far to protect them, and why the people were punished later on, as you mentioned in 2 Samuel 21, because of this oath being broken by Saul having killed some of the Gibeonites. We mentioned on Tuesday, Alan, that it was mentioned in that covenant ceremony that it wasn't just Israel, but also the resident alien citizen alike that was indebted to follow the covenant and to do as the Lord commanded. Here we talked then about Rahab being one of those individuals that we could most assuredly put in that group. And here we have another group that's mentioned, the Gibeonites, that I would say are now included within that particular group of people. And they're actually heavily involved in the story of God's people from this point on. You mentioned 2 Samuel 21. They're also mentioned in 1 Samuel 6 and 7. They're mentioned in 1 Chronicles 16, 2 Kings 3, even later on in Nehemiah 7, and I believe another portion of Nehemiah. This is a group of people who play different parts. I think the ark actually at one point rested within one of their cities, one of the cities of the Gibeonites, and that just shows that it's not about nationality. The whole issue here, and you brought this up a couple of studies ago, which I think was really important. We probably should have brought it up. Probably should have mentioned something about it on Tuesday about the destruction of Ai and the people of Bethel. It wasn't about nationalities as to whether or not you're going to live or die before the Lord. It wasn't about your ethnic identity. It was about your righteousness and whether you were faithful and trusting in God. Here we have a people who ethnically were not a part of the Jews. They were part of Gentile. They were Gentile peoples, and yet here and later on, they're going to be counted as a people among Israel, not because their blood was right, but because they were faithful to the covenant. And that's what's so important for us to understand, not just within this text, but within what we saw with Rahab, also what we saw in the killings of the people of Jericho, Ai, and Bethel. If you sin or rebel against God, then God was going to use Israel as his tool for judgment against them. Here for these people, they feared God. They wanted to be spared by him. They surrendered themselves before the Israelites. And here we have them being preserved. And I think that's just such an important aspect of the story, to have that proper perspective of God and his people, that he wasn't just going around killing people because they weren't Jews, but he was punishing people for their sin and their rebellion against him. And he just happened to use the Jews as the tool in order to accomplish that punishment and to bring that punishment to its fulfillment through this conquest of the people. What else do you have here, Alan?
I'm just thinking of, I can think of at least one person that is a Hethite or a Hittite that is still around later on. I think of Uriah the Hittite.
Yes. Oh, that's great. Yeah.
If God's intention was to completely wipe out these peoples because of their ethnicity, then why is Uriah still around during the days of David? And and so many others that will, that are mentioned that are not native, blood Jews, but just happen to have survived for whatever reason. Maybe they didn't get destroyed in the book of Joshua, and their family stuck around. But we see, like you said, Gibeon is mentioned several times, the Gibeonites, and they're involved with Solomon and the building of the temple, things like that. So these people have given themselves to God, and they have become resident aliens, and really that's kind of that's a great thing for us, because we as non-Jews are kind of in that same boat. We are Gentiles, and yet even before, we obviously are looking at it from the New Testament point of view, where the Gentiles, all nations would come in, but even that concept is happening right now in the book of Joshua. Other peoples we'll see later on. Ruth is a Moabitess. These peoples from all over the world will come. The Queen of Sheba will come and visit Solomon. They hear about the God of Israel. They investigate it, and because of their soft hearts, they desire to be a part of God's people, and they can. They're given protection. Resident aliens are mentioned throughout the book of Moses. The book of the law. They're given protections and safety, and given rights as well, just like the people of Israel. So as long as they still have to follow the same laws as Israel, but as long as they do that, then they are, essentially in the same group. And, of course, the most important thing is being, protected and loved by God, which is what they're actually searching for. So it's sad to see all these instances of non-Jews doing what's right and fearing God and seeking and searching and reaching for God, when you and then contrast that with the people that were born into the people of God, and then they're heading the other direction. So it's gives us good examples to follow, and then just highlights those that did not take advantage of of the blessings they were given.
That's right. And all these interactions that we have between the Israelites and the nations outside of them, it always takes my mind back to Exodus 19, where the Lord's speaking to the Jews. If you will carefully listen to me and keep my covenant, you will be my own possession out of all the peoples, although the whole earth is mine, and you will be my kingdom of priests and my holy nation. These are the words that you are to say to the Israelites. You'll be my kingdom of priests. Well, what were the priests to do? They were to mediate between the peoples and God. And here is Israel serving in that role as priests, bringing these people who are outside of God's chosen people to be closer to God, to be in covenant with them. And how much we wish that this would have been the norm throughout the conquest. And instead of having to kill people because of their rebellion and obstinance against God, that people surrendered to the Lord and sought to be a part of his people through following the covenant that he had given to them. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And there are going to be people who continue to rebel against them. Even in the next chapter, we're going to read next week, Alan, in Joshua chapter 10, we're going to see where the nations outside of Israel, they didn't like what Gibeon did. They didn't like the fact that they had joined the enemy in their minds. And they're going to go up against Gibeon, and Gibeon's going to call out to Joshua and the people of Israel for help. We're going to read about that this next Tuesday in Joshua chapter 10. Hope you can join us for that. Then, Alan, do you have anything else you want to add before we conclude for today?
Yeah, that's it. Oh, looking forward to another impressive miracle by God in chapter 10.
Oh, yeah. Certainly impressive might be a bit of an understatement. Certainly one of the coolest miracles that he has within this conquest story of the sun standing still and not moving with this guy. That's just a crazy thing to consider. Well, that's what we're going to read on Tuesday. Hope you'll join us for that. If you're looking for a church to worship with this upcoming Sunday in a couple of days, hope you'll join us as we study, as we worship together on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock here at the Church House, 384 Pleasant Plains Road. We'll be singing together, praying together, observing the supper together, and studying from God's word. We're going to be talking about the idea of being a forgiving people in a very unforgiving world. Certainly forgiveness is something that each of us long for, but unfortunately we're not always the best at giving out. So we're going to talk about that on Sunday morning. Hope that you could join us for that study. We'll be meeting in person, or if you can join us in person, we will be broadcasting that study live on Facebook and YouTube for your benefit. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hope that you have a great rest of your Friday. Hope you have a great weekend. And on Sunday, you have the opportunity to worship your God and our God with the saints. Hope that you'll join us for our next study on Tuesday. Thank you so much. God bless you. And if we can be of any service to you, please reach out and we'll do the best we can to serve your needs. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Take care and God bless.